Everybody, today is National Autism Awareness Day, and according to the CDC, it is a condition that impacts about 1 out of every 68 U.S. children. A new children's book called Uniquely Wired is working to help both children and parents better understand what it's like to be on the autism spectrum. Joining me now is the book's author, Julia Cook. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. What inspired you? What is the problem that this can help us solve?
Children with autism fascinate me. They see the world differently, they hear the world differently, and if we can figure out what they're trying to tell us, and we can also figure out what they're trying to convey, then understanding and accepting them and understanding their gifts becomes possible.
Which is, I mean, that's enormously important, and part of where we start is knowing what is happening with kids, right?
Yeah.
You know, so that if we see a certain behavior or something's going on, that at least it occurs to us that this could be behavior on the spectrum, and don't overreact to it, attempt to understand what we're seeing.
Well, they're not experts at telling us how they feel.
Right, that's in fact one of the difficulties.
But every behavior that they have has a purpose. So if we can watch them, we can learn what kind of a purpose they're conveying.
And be open to that.
Sense. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what the book is about.
It's about a boy named Zach, and he tells in first person how he sees the world and how he hears the world, and how when things are too loud he wears earmuffs because it sounds too hard. And sometimes he likes to flap his arms. Which is
a common thing.
And he says, that's just my brain thinking on the outside of my body. You should try it, sometime it really works. My teacher says it's great exercise. So it normalizes behaviors because that's his normal.
Yeah. What was your inspiration for this book?
I actually wrote a book for the CDC called Amazing Me, and it's about developmental milestones. But the inspiration for this one came from listening to a man named Stephen Shores in Malaysia a couple years ago. He was speaking, and he is on the autism spectrum, but he has one foot in each camp, typical and non-typical. Okay, so he explains why bright lights bother him and why sounds bother him, and there's no filter. So it would be like you walking in front of a car and a horn goes off, it's a startle. So it's very hard. It's like, he said, sometimes our sensories are so sensitive, it's like pouring acid into an open wound. And so when you think about it, if you can put, you know, your feet into a child with autism shoes,
right.
You know, but the thing is, there's no typical autistic kid, if you want to call it that. If you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism.
Right.
They're all uniquely wired and they're all phenomenal.
But at least understanding that much,
yes.
that they are responding to something that's very real to them, and how can I bridge that gap and we can understand each other. Tell me a little bit about how you'd like this book to be used by families, by schools, by all of us. Who's the audience?
It's for everybody. It's for everybody who either works with kids with autism, or has a child with autism, or knows a child with autism, which is basically everybody. Because the more we can understand, the easier it is for us to interpret and accept and include, and everybody is different. And knowledge is key with kids, because if they're unaware or they're not sure, they often are, you know, avoid.
As anyone would, right?
Yeah, right. And social skills are so important to develop in these children at younger ages, and they're not expert at it, but they're really good at recipes, social recipes. So a lot of my books are social recipe books. If this happens, this is what I do. So this is a book to kind of give you some empathetic understanding and appreciation for autism and its gifts.
And you mentioned something before about the gifts. Let's go into that. Give me some examples of some of the things that autism can bring to a person that makes them capable of enormously talented outcomes.
Well, they're not distracted. They have like linear vision, so they can really concentrate on one thing and learn everything about that one thing. And they're totally interested in that one thing, and if you're not, it doesn't bother them at all. So we can learn a lot about kids on the spectrum, because sometimes we're oversensitive to people's needs, and they are just matter-of-fact linear thinkers, and they simplify the world, and they bring to us a look that we haven't even taken time to do.
I want to ask you a question that I've heard lots of people ask. Do we have more kids living on the autism spectrum, more adults as well, consequently, or are we just better at identifying what this is these days?
I'm thinking it's just more identification, because we classify things autism that we didn't before.
Right.
The jury's out on what is causing this, and so the focus of this book isn't that. The focus of this book is, you know, here's this kid and look what he has to offer, and maybe I can gain some insight into helping people understand that a little bit better.
Which is a wonderful purpose. If a parent is seeing a child develop and they think there may be, you know, a reality of autism in their life, what would you suggest they do? Early
intervention is key, because the way kids are forming their brains when they're young, you know, most rapidly during that time. And there's signs you can look for. The CDC has a whole list of signs what to look for. And if you catch it, you know, the earlier the child is intervened with, the more success the child will have in the long term. We don't want them to be 5 years old and a little bit on the spectrum and not have anybody work with them. So it's really important. And, you know, if your child is identified, then you know, you love your child, you work with your child, you look for their gifts, you surround yourself with other people who've walked this path, because there's a lot of support out there.
There is.
And you also always remember to take time for your typical children and yourselves, because they are time suckers, but they're worth every penny of it. But they just, you know, so you need to make sure you designate time for you.
Thanks so much. Something else to note today, Washington Autism Alliance and Advocacy is hosting a Day Out for Autism this Sunday, April 8th at Marina Park in Kirkland. The event is an inclusive and family-friendly celebration, which includes a fun walk, autism-friendly vendors, and resources all in one place. We've linked the info and links to Julie's book and to other autism resources to our website for you. Back after this. Thank you.